welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to Earth Feels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell. Hi, Rose.
Hey, Christine. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. How's San Diego?
Oh, lovely. Warm weather in the 70s.
I saw a picture of you by the ocean.
Yeah, all that sunshine and I think it's negative ions, right?
Which are good.
You come back at the end of the day and just like, oh, so relaxed.
Well, I've been puzzling inside and found a fun puzzle for $3 at our local thrift store. Finished it, and there were actually all the pieces there, which is pretty amazing.
Oh, that is amazing.
It was a mélange of a whole bunch of Hardy Boys books, pictures, which it was very fun. And so that was, I don't have the ocean and the negative ions. I have the negative ions from my puzzling, which as long as I shower while I'm puzzling, I'll get negative ions. So our question today is it possible to have a positive vision for the future in the midst of a climate emergency?
Yeah. I like how that sits,
Yeah. It's a tough one. It isn't easy. I think we can admit that, at least not for me. It doesn't come easily.
Yeah, no, I think in any kind of transformation, it's can you envision the positive instead of just looking at everything that's wrong? And on a personal level, that can be hard. So on a collective level, if you extrapolate, yeah, that can be really, but we know energetically that what we focus on expands. So can we have a vision of what we want life to look like?
While we're in this very messy caterpillar stage where there's a possibility that we could turn into a butterfly, but wow, it's getting really mucky inside this cocoon, pretty gooey and disgusting, and there's nothing that looks like a butterfly in sight.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's why it's important that we do focus on some of the good news of things that are happening, because there are, in the book Project Drawdown, we know all those possibilities already exist. So there are things that we can head towards as we're heading away from this old paradigm.
And so much of it is just so much better than where we are. That's why I guess for those of us that are climate aware, climate activists who've been looking at this for as long as you and I have, it's hard to believe why the clinging to the old is so prevalent still. Because why can't we have cleaner water? Why can't we have cleaner air? Why can't we do all of these things while we move towards fossil fuel free future? I mean, it comes with the territory and more democracy without all of that money and power concentrated in the hands of the trillionaire fossil fuel industry.
Yeah, and that's where I think it becomes very disheartening, because we see the profit motive and how it's entrenched in our paradigm and everything that we do. Everything that we do, it's all about, well, who's going to make money doing this? And then those that control the messaging, I'm going to say his name, so maybe it's controversial, Rupert Murdoch, owning so much of the media around the world, that the messages that get out there to the people who aren't really searching for the messages, right? So the stuff that you're hit with in mainstream media is available to everybody. Those of us who are more involved in activism, especially on the climate front, we know that we're digging a little bit more to find really the true story, or the more expanded story. He Mass media may not be essentially lying to us, but they're omitting. Sins of omission are huge. They're not telling us the whole truth. And so and that becomes a profitability thing. Who's paying for advertisements? Who's paying, who's distributing this? Who's lining somebody's pocket so that they get their message out there in the slant that they want? I mean, everything can be spun how you want it to appear. And we're living in a time that's becoming more and more transparent.
Yeah, we'll see.
But
What happens with your impeachment hearings going on right now? Speaking of wanting transparency, I don't know. It's hard.
well, and so I think that all comes into play, right? Because there's a certain portion of our elected officials that really don't want there to be complete transparency. If they did, they'd be calling witnesses. But they're saying, oh, well, no, we just want this dismissed. And then there's a whole faction of people that feel like, of the general public, that feel like this is a waste of our money, we're not paying attention to this, versus others of us are horrified that our democracy is being dismantled. So who's in charge of the messaging? Who has the power? Who has the power to call the witnesses? Yet, interestingly, don't want to get too much into politics, because I think climate needs to unite us as opposed to further divide us. But McConnell last night came out and said that he does not have the votes to prohibit further witnesses. I thought that was interesting. I thought that was very interesting. So more unfolding.
Yes, more transparency. And so in the middle of this mess, not just politically in the US, but this climate emergency, the bushfires in Australia, where is our positive vision for the future in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, can we see the world that we want to live in? What do we want that to look like? Economic justice, racial justice, climate justice. I mean, I think it's all very interconnected.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is all connected. The treatment of the earth, the treatment of women, the treatment of indigenous people, the degradation that this system does, and the disregard for all of those sort of ways of being that are different. And I will go back to the patriarchy, different from the patriarchy. Yeah, a vision of, is it possible to actually envision what that would be like? I think it's so different than what we know on the macro, but maybe have there been times maybe on the micro where we could kind of say, yeah, that's what this would be like in society if this experience or that experience was broadened.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, if you think about once you become mindful of the change that we need to make. I mean, I can't now drive down the freeway and look at the traffic that's coming towards me and know that I'm in my combustible engine car and not be mindful of how much needs to change. Can we visualize? I was driving with a friend the other day and I was like, so what would it look like? I mean, if we wanted to have mass transit, how would we get from place to place? What does that look like? Can we begin to imagine it, because we know that our thoughts are powerful? Can we begin to talk about it, because we know that our words are powerful to get us to the next step? Every action, everything that's ever come into being has started with a thought. So do we spend more time thinking about it individually? Do we spend more time envisioning it individually?
I loved that little clip that AOC, the
Alexandria.
Ocasio-Cortez, was involved in. It was a year and a half ago. And did you ever see it? She was sitting on a train, an older version of herself. It was animated, and she was talking to a younger person and talking about, yeah, isn't it great how this all came to be, and reflecting on how things were at that time and how things looked pretty bleak, and
yet we made it through.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It was done in conjunction with Naomi Klein and Naomi Klein's husband, Avi Lewis, who, of course, Naomi and Avi are Canadians. I think Naomi is a dual citizen, but Avi Lewis is definitely Canadian. His dad is a important figure for Canadians. Stephen Lewis, was a UN ambassador on AIDS. Anyways, so they're working on the Green Leap, I think it's called in Canada. Not the New Green Deal, but it's the same idea, envisioning.
Yeah, there was a similar article in Time magazine a few months ago by Bill McKibben. And he's in 2050 and addressing, we saved the planet. This is how we did it. So I'll include a link to that too.
Nice.
Because I think it's pertinent to to the envisioning process.
Yeah. We have to acknowledge what is here and that it needs to change, but to really grasp onto that vision, and not in a Pollyanna kind of a way.
So I think it comes back to the idea of, right now we live in this story of separation, that we think that we're not, whatever we do to the earth, we're not doing to ourselves. Whatever we do to another person, it's not reflective of what we're doing to ourselves. And I think that maybe is the key to where we start, to realizing that we're all one. And so there was this article, or this chapter in Project Drawdown, the book, that's written by Paul Hawken. It's called An Opening. And he says, to be effective, we require and deserve a conversation that includes possibility and opportunity, not repetitive emphasis on our undoing. So that's what we're talking about, right? That conversation needs to extend beyond the individual, because any idea that we exist as isolated beings is a myth. We are all intricate, interconnected parts of complex social structures and cultures, and more broadly, of the entire web of life, the ultimate source of water, food, fiber, medicines, inspiration, beauty, art, and joy.
So you don't necessarily have to be a Buddhist to be able to connect with this vision. So it's not, because one of the basic tenets of Buddhism is that we're all one. But this is a way of saying, very practically, we all drink the same water, we breathe the same air, we depend on the same earth for our sustenance. So whether or not one buys into the Buddhist version of reality or not, there is a way to connect with the idea that we're all one. And Paul Hawken has just done that.
Yeah. When you can come to that understanding, or for me, when I can come to that understanding, it definitely lives in my heart space. When I can come to that understanding, then I know that every action that I take affects you, affects the birds, affects the insects, the bees. It's a domino effect. And when we see that, in my estimation, when we see that, it makes me see my responsibility in a different way. I'm not just responsible for my little corner of the world. Yes, that's where it starts, but it's that butterfly wing thing, that what the butterfly wings on one side of the earth can affects it makes change everywhere. Am I telling that story right?
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes it doesn't feel like that because, I mean, I've been a climate activist for 10 years, and it's like, wow, I wish my little butterfly wings had an effect. But
Well, they do. They do.
I know.
And then there's a trust element that comes in there. And that, I think, I know that from my spiritual journey, right? That sometimes you just have to, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not coming. Just because you can't feel it doesn't mean it's not there.
Yes. And that trust and the fact that it's not just my wings in quotation marks and yours. There literally are millions of people around the world that are going, no, it's not okay, in a way that collectively, have we ever said that globally before? I don't know. What was the article? Were there 50 million people in a climate protest in India? It was millions. They stood out and they formed a line almost 20,000 kilometers long. So this is a global shift.
Right. And it is happening. And I think getting back to the suppression that we are experiencing from certain powers, does the average person know that people are in the streets in India, people are in the streets in Australia, people are in the streets in Hong Kong?
Mm-hmm.
And so there is this rising up of humanity that is saying, we care about our planet, we want better for our children and our grandchildren, we want survival for humanity.
And money is not more important than future generations and clean water and clean air.
Right.
You know, just the idea, it's insane. I've said this before, it's insane.
Right. But there's money to be made. So very, very similarly, I mean, it's a little bit of a adjunct to it, but when you were in Boston visiting me and we went out on the harbor tour,
Mm-hmm.
and we could see it was high tide, and we could see that the harbor was coming ashore, but they were building and putting these great granite blocks down there so that they could supposedly keep the water out, but really essentially it's so that they could sell more real estate at this point. They know what's coming, but the profit motive is so powerful that we're willing to do crazy things to make money.
It's like the two sides of the brain, the left side or the left hand and the right hand, aren't communicating. Because I did hear this week that the city of Boston has just declared a climate emergency.
Oh, I didn't hear that since I'm not in Boston, but I will counter that and tell you on the negative side.
Yes.
That Chase Bank, our friend Jamie
Mm-hmm.
Dimon, just won the contract for having ATM machines in 20 locations for the MBTA, which is Mass Bay Transit Authority. They put out bids and Chase won them all. So now when you use your Chase card at any MBTA station or get money from any MBTA station in Boston, you're directly funding fossil fuels. Hello? Is anybody listening?
Well,
God, it makes me so crazy.
So I spent part of this morning talking to my investment advisor because I'm moving some of my investments around. So I've been doing more research even since we talked about money a few weeks ago. And I have to tell you, wow, it is hard to avoid JP Morgan Chase because I've been looking at funds that are ESG, and low carbon funds, because ESG does not necessarily equate to low carbon. Interestingly.
Environmental, social, and governance.
Okay, thank you. So I've been looking at that and I found some good ones because they don't invest in fossil fuels in that energy sector. and they rate companies for their environmental, social, and governance index, and they choose the ones that are rated higher. But guess what? They invest in financial markets, and JP Morgan Chase or RBC, which is the Canadian equivalent of JP Morgan Chase, in that they don't invest as much as Chase does, but they're the bank in Canada that's the most invested. Heavy sigh. So I think what I will do is contact the fund managers, because one of them is a mutual fund that I'm looking at. Some of them are ETFs, and they're from a credit union in Vancouver, a really big one, Van City, and ask them if they've considered this, because they do buy and sell within their portfolio, and I think they need to be ditching JP Morgan Chase. So that's on my to-do list. And as well, interestingly, Desjardins Credit Union, which you may or may not remember from our conversation with Alison Kirsch, is one of the investors in oil and gas pipeline in Canada. They have quite a good fossil fuel free fund to invest in. So I just feel like, it's like the good place dilemma. You always end up in the bad place no matter what decision you make, because life is so complicated in the 21st.
Well, and so the paradigm, we're living in a paradigm. And so I think that's the frustration for on an individual basis. We can make our changes, but it's the overall arcing structure that needs to change. And so how do we begin to envision that, and that means taking actions to get Chase to change who they are. And that means being uncomfortable with cutting up your credit card and changing your who you bank with, and going to your loan officer and saying, my car loan is with this. I can't stay here. I got to, and maybe it's going to cost you a few more interest points. Will people do that because it's money? It may be money out of their pocket. Well, I mean, Chase has won this giant award in Boston. I have to believe it's because they were the most economical bidder. I mean, isn't that how bidding works? So they come in and undercut and say, okay, well, this is what we'll do for X amount of time, knowing that the amount of clients that they're going to pick up is incredible, and that all that money is going into their funding of the desecration of our planet.
Mm-hmm. Well, did you catch the video of Jane Fonda this week?
Yeah, I did. Yep. So maybe that's what we need to be talking about, some good news, right?
Yeah.
Because certainly Jane Fonda in her red coat and her red hat as calling out Jamie Dimon and just saying, share the video. You can be an armchair warrior. Just share the video so that he eventually sees it. So his wife sees it. So his daughters see it, right? Because it might not be his conscience that's affected, but maybe they can help him make that switch. Avaz, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Avaz, yeah.
They took out a full page advertisement in the Financial Times calling out Jamie Dimon. And then Greta demanded that the banks at Davos stop funding the fossil fuel industry. Elizabeth Warren wrote to banks telling them to send her their climate plans. So, and then there was a Wall Street CEOs went public whining that the climate crisis is not their fault. So if that's true, then they're starting to feel it.
Yes.
They're starting to feel the push from, and that's people need to become a movement. Pushing.
That really is good news. And on a little side note of good news, speaking of Greta Thunberg, you may be aware of Steve Mnuchin. He's in the Trump administration, but he publicly berated Greta and put her down for not being a trained economist.
And his wife pushed back.
Yes, his wife publicly said we all need to be getting off of fossil fuels. Greta, keep up the good work.
Yep.
So that's going to be an interesting dinner table conversation.
Yeah.
So that's some good news. And for our action tip and our sanity tip together, I thought we'd bundle them up with a little bow this week and get people as an action tip to go on the Greater Good websites. And there's two. You found one and I found one. We'll put both of those links up. That's out of the University of Berkeley, I believe, not far from where you are now. And they offer a lot of resources for mental health support, but shifting our perspective. So gratitude and kindness. And one of the key people involved there is Dasher Keltner, who's written a book called Born to Be Good. And it discusses how innately humans are actually geared to be kind to each other. So I recommend that. And then the sanity tip would actually be following through on one of the tips that they have there, or you can even take free courses through their website.
And not to, we're not in the competitive model, so we'll just let you know that they also have a podcast.
That's right. The science.
You might want to listen to that.
Is it called The Science of Happiness?
Science of Happiness, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is, yeah.
Nice. So there we go. You can go back to your ocean. I can't go back to my puzzling. I finished it, but hopefully I'll get a new one soon. And honestly, I've been getting a lot of pleasure in the last few weeks by filling up the bird feeder outside of the window here in our wintry Northern Ontario and watching the birds. And I now have a suet cage up there, which I put up, and 24 hours later, some big bird, I'm thinking it might have been a gray jay or a raven, actually opened the cage and took out all of the suet. So
opened
the cage. So I put it back with new suet and I wired it shut. And so far it's still there. But I have last year I had a big 4-cage suet thing that disappeared. And my husband assured me it would appear when the snow melted, but I actually think that an animal, possibly a wolf, climbed the tree and made off with it because it never showed up. So all that to say, enjoying the nature around me. That's what you've been doing. That's one way to get through this crazy climate emergency.
Yeah, see the beauty, and know that that we are all interconnected. Yeah, good stuff.
All right, catch you next time.
That's this week's episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me. You see, your mother, she has been suffering. Then the truth is told beneath the sea.